Hi dear people, it's Boris from Woodleaves, and finally I've managed to get outside and try to record this video. And I think this is my third or fourth attempt of getting outside and trying to record, because the weather was just very bad and we had persistent rain, we had heavy winds, the dark comes down really quickly after I leave my office. So yes, here I am today. New day, another chance. So let's give it a go. I hope it will stay stable for next 15-20 minutes. The reason why I'm in the forest, which is my absolutely favorite place on the planet, is because I want to talk about the basic principles of deep mulching. And mulching is nothing more but a natural process. So I thought to myself, there's no better place to record this video but to be in real nature. I've only recently started this YouTube channel with the intention to try to convey my experiences that I've gathered in last X amount of years about the deep mulching on the garden. At the moment I'm having lovely allotment and I use the same method. This is my third season in the UK climate, which is quite humid and wet. And a lot of people told me not to even try the method here because of the slugs. But I just gave it a go 3 years ago and I've gained amazing results. However, there are so many things I want to talk about that I'll try to break them down into small sections and have a lot of content for a lot of future videos, so stay tuned. Well, obviously the first question is, what is mulch? A mulch is a cover of biomaterials that is protecting the soil, and it has numerous benefits. The way I perceive nature is, for me, it is a process rather than the resource. And being a process, it means that it's been continuously developed for 4 billion years since the beginning of the planet. And this is the latest update of the evolution, this second, this moment now. And I just thought to myself, why wouldn't I learn from such a powerful teacher that has all the knowledge that we need? If we take a look, we can easily notice that the whole floor of the woodland is covered with biomaterials, and there's no a single patch, a single area that is exposed to the atmosphere. And basically this is the same principle that we follow in the deep mulching method in the garden or on the allotment. Now what happens? So if we move the mulch, and obviously the thickness depends on the area and the woodland and the type of trees and its location and climate, we can see that the soil inside is moist. Okay, fair enough, it's been raining in the last few weeks, but this is always the case in the woodland. The soil is never cracked, the soil is never dried out, and the soil is always full of wildlife. So keeping the moisture of the soil is benefit number one if we deep mulch in the garden. The basic rule about the mulching is that the mulch in the garden needs to be thick enough. And by thick enough, I mean it should be at least probably 15 plus centimeters in thickness, so it provides its own benefits. Now you have the full right to ask why the mulch needs to be thick on the garden and not in the forest or any other ecosystem. Well, if you take a look around, the woodland floor is protected with the trees, which means not a lot of direct sunlight gets to the soil to dry it out. Roxy, I'm trying. She's so energetic that I literally have to get rid of her. She's causing a lot of noise. Yes, so the garden is always established preferably in a sunny space, open space, which gets a lot of sun, and that's what we want. But this is the main reason why the thickness of the mulch needs to be thick. Otherwise, the sun will just evaporate the humidity from the soil. Another benefit of deep mulching is the wildlife. Having your soil covered will provide a lot of hiding space and shelters for tiny animals that naturally live in the area. and they will all hide inside of the mulch, which means you will boost the wildlife and you will also establish the natural balance in between the pests, as we call them, and the natural predators. Another great benefit, and probably one of the most important for us gardeners, is the mulch will prevent weeds from growing. And I've seen a lot of questions being asked on Facebook about concerns of the people, whether the seeds from the mulch will germinate, whether the hay or straw will just boost the population of weeds and wild grasses, and how to manage the situation. Well, from my experience, again, if the mulch is thick enough, and this is really important, if the mulch is thick enough, the seeds won't have a chance, because each seed has a certain amount of energy stored inside, so it can germinate, develop the root, first 2 or 4 pairs of leaves, and get to the sun to create the energy through the photosynthesis. So if you cover the seed with thick layer of mulch again, it just won't have enough energy to grow through. Now, you again might also have very good question, what about the top layer of the mulch? Well, the top layer of the mulch shouldn't be as compressed as the bottom layer, and also it should be dry because obviously of the sun and wind. So again, these seeds will not have a chance to germinate, and your garden will not become a wild meadow if the mulch is thick enough. Now, I have the experience with establishing 2 gardens in 2 completely different climates from scratch and establishing the mulching method. And all I can say is, once you apply the mulch, again, thick layer of mulch, I have to be boring with this, but this is really the crucial fact about this video, the thickness. Once you apply sufficient amount of mulch on your garden, the next year you will get rid of at least 80 to 90% of the weeds. And I'm not lying, I'm not exaggerating. This is my experience twice in, as I said, two completely different climates. My first garden was in a very warm Croatian climate, and the second garden is here in humid Wales. And I had the same results. So covering the plot with thick layer of mulch reduced the weeds for approximately 80 to 90% next season. You will always get weeds. Don't expect to have completely sterile and dead plot, because this is not the aim. But you will only have the most persistent and stubborn weeds, such as convolvulus or silverweed. They might grow through, but they're really easy to manage because you just have to pull them out and leave them on top of the mulch so they dry out. When you are mulching on your garden, you don't actually need to have the composting heap, because everything, all the biomaterials from the area, from the plot, will eventually become mulch itself and go down. This is another probably good content for another video, because now is the time to clean the garden for the winter and use all these biomaterials as mulch. So if you give me some time, I will record another video about how to prepare the beds for the winter and how to reuse all the biomaterials that you have on the garden. Probably another very good benefit of the method is that it massively reduces the amount of work. And I promise you, I'm not selling anything now, but I am really confident because I have my own experience with this. So once you apply the mulch on the garden, no matter the size of the plot, as long as the mulch is thick enough, you will massively reduce the amount of work next season. There will be no weeding or just a little bit of it. There will be no watering or just a little bit of it. Everything will be self-managed. Everything will be sustainable. You will find the balance, and instead of losing nerves about having untidy plot, you can just do exactly what I do, enjoying it and just watch the process work for you. Mulch is continuously decomposing, especially in the lower layers in between the soil and the bottom of the mulch, because there is quite a lot of humidity there, and the process of decomposing can be active, which means that this is another benefit for us gardens. We are continuously feeding and improving the soil. Advice here would be use as many different materials in your mulch if you can. Hay, wild grass, is always better than the straw. Straw is basically just a cut crop, such as wheat or rice. Always add different materials, but make sure you do a little research before you apply materials into the garden that these plants are not allelopathic, which means that they contain certain chemicals that will prevent another plants from growing. And I have a small story here. It was last year. I've used good and decomposed horse manure, and I've tried to plant 4 or 5 different batches of courgette seeds, and they just didn't want to grow. So after a few attempts, and after using the same locations for growing these plants, I've just noticed that probably there's something in the manure that's preventing these seeds to germinate. So I've used different batch of manure and homemade compost. I've used different location, and I had loads of courgettes. They just grew wild. So this is something else you need to consider. If you're not sure which plants have allelopathic properties, you can easily just Google. So if you're not sure about the pine leaves, you can just Google, is pine allelopathic? Is cherry laurel allelopathic? Is fern allelopathic? Anything you want to introduce into the garden, if you're not sure, do a quick research just to make sure you don't introduce something that you don't want there. The next obvious question is, what can I use for mulch and how can I make sure it's safe for the plants? Well, number one, make sure it's diverse. So introduce as many different species as you can. All the offcuts, the twigs, leaves, dead flowers, last year perennials, offcuts, wood shavings, wood dust. Anything that hasn't been treated with the chemicals can go onto the mulch. Also, advice would be to chop it up into small pieces, no more than 20-30 centimeters, so you can easily handle them. There's nothing wrong if you put long pieces into the mulch, but then within a few years' time, when it's covered with a new mulch, if you want to make a hole and plant something, you might hit something big and solid, so this is something you want to avoid. But it's not the end of the world if you put big pieces. They will certainly last longer. A lot of people that have spoken about deep mulching are concerned about whether the mulch or hay is organic, or whether the hay has been, or the plot has been treated with aminoprylates. These are the chemicals that are preventing broad weeds from growing on the area, so the pasture can be clean and weeds free. Well, I always try to supply hay from people I know, and I ask them and I expect the honest answer whether this has been treated. And I always try to use hay, old hay, which was supposed to be a food for the animals. Even though these chemicals have very low toxicity for animals and humans, but they can affect certain plants. Personally, I'm not really too concerned because the world is as it is. There's a lot of contamination coming from everywhere. The airplanes are flying and the smoke is everywhere. Light contamination, visual contamination, chemical contamination, noise contamination. It's everywhere. It's part of everyday's life. So I'm not really too worried. Obviously, if I know the meadow has been treated, then I would say no to that batch of hay. But if I don't know, I wouldn't really worry too much. Also, there is the question, what happens with these chemicals when the hay decomposes? Do they break down? Do they stay the same? How they affect the plants? Which plants? Maybe they will just disappear within a few years' time. So when we apply the mulch on top of the last year's mulch, obviously it will take a few years until all the mulch in between soil and the top layer decomposes. So there's also a scientific question, what happens with these chemicals? And this is another reason why I'm not really pretty much worried at all. I'm trying to be as organic as I can, but nothing is 100% nowadays. So I just try to enjoy my method and get the best results I can. Now, when we understand the absolute basics of the method and its benefits, you might ask yourself, when can I start mulching? When is the best time of the year? And the answer is anytime. However, you might find autumn or winter a little bit easier because there's no a lot of vegetation, which means you can just cover the plot. If you have loads of plants growing in the middle of the season, you will have to break down the bales into small pieces and basically cover all the plants around. If we go back what we said before about the weeds, you would not cover the plants because you would eventually kill them. Lack of light, exhausting the plants to get out of the mulch, spending too much energy, etc. So the idea is the mulch is around the plant. So it's entirely up to you. It's your decision when you want to start, but now would be the best time when the vegetation is quiet or getting quiet. There are a few things I would advise to consider before you start mulching. That is definitely the location of the garden, the population of slugs. Do you really struggle now at this point of time? If you do, you might consider to use nematodes, which are a biological tool to fight against the slugs. Nematodes are very tiny worms that live in the soil naturally, and somebody had a very good business idea, and they've discovered which nematodes attack which slugs by entering into their body and transferring the bacterial disease, which stops slugs from feeding. That's how they end their cycle. And basically you just buy around 12 million of these worms. Do not worry, if you don't like worms, you can't see them. They're microscopic beings, and you just get a small package of wood dust, which you dissolve in the water and spray the garden. Read the instructions if you decide to go this way, because normally you wouldn't use nematodes if it's really cold. So this is probably one of the biggest no's of the method. Once you apply the method, you can't use nematodes anymore because nematodes need to be in the soil. They can't live in a fluffy mulch. So this is, I would probably say, the only big no that I personally have against the method. Obviously, each climate, each garden is different, so this is not my ultimate statement, but this is just what I've experienced. Roxy, she's destroying forest. So yes, I would consider managing the slugs population before you put them out, and if you struggle now, you just might have to continuously manage the slugs throughout the season. What I do in Wales, on this particular allotment, I don't have too many slugs. There are slugs, and I don't want to get rid of them, as I said in the video with Liz Zorob, but I want to find a balance that they don't destroy my crops and they don't become a concern in the garden. So personally, in the early spring, I put a little bit more effort to manage the slugs. I just put the beer traps, and I also handpick them around, well, after the sunset time, to be honest. You might have to use a torch to find them. Also, a good attractant is dry food for the dogs. If you just put the heaps in the garden, try to put them away from the beds, maybe in the pots or somewhere in the corners. The dog food has a really strong smell, which will attract slugs, and you will be able just to collect a bunch of them. I do not want to advise how to get rid of them. It's up to you. Try to find the most human way, or just take them somewhere else if you can. I'm not advising to take them to the neighbor's plot of the one you don't particularly like. So just put them somewhere next to the river and let them be. Let them be. The value of life is value of life. So yeah. I also just want to mention quickly before I end this video is about how to prepare the soil, even though this is completely new subject for the new video, and I can talk about my experiences, what I've done. I had 2 different types of soil, 2 different problems, so I can kind of convey my personal experience, which I will do in the near future. But basically, you don't have to put a lot of effort because mulch will be working for you next season. All I've done is I've applied, I think, 2 big bags of cow and horse manure. I've just scattered it around the plot and covered it with a thick layer of mulch, which means you don't need to weed, you don't need to dig, you don't need to flip the soil, you don't need to put a lot of effort, because if the mulch is thick enough again, it will just continue working for you throughout the season next year, and your amount of work will be reduced to an absolute minimum. And yes, so that's it for today. I really hope that I've managed to convey the basic principles and basic facts about the method. Obviously, any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. Sorry, I'm trying not to get hurt. Do subscribe to the channel. I will be posting a lot of videos about the method and my experiences. And obviously, get in touch anytime. Thank you very much. Stay happy, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.